afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, a host Imperial Dane. And I've managed to get myself the last remaining Western Front Army commanders, thanks to relics. So I can actually now review them and sort of point them out, you know, their strengths, weaknesses, all that, and if you know, you might want to consider getting them. We'll be starting out here with the Americans. We'll be starting out with the Recon Support Commander. The name rather giving away what it's going to be good at. It's going to be good at reconnaissance, it's going to be good at spotting what the devil is going on, and maybe also reacting to it. I mean, initially here you get a first command point, forward observers, which basically means your riflemen either in cover or in a structure can see much farther, and for some of you that sound a bit dull. But then if you actually think about it, it's actually pretty solid. I mean, it's a pretty powerful ability for no cost. I mean, basically, you can see a lot further. You can react much sooner to what your opponent does, but also at the same time get basically better clearance for your anti-tank guns, so that you don't have to stick someone's hit too far ahead. You can stay a bit further back and get good range in your anti-tank guns. Same with artillery. You can just stick back there and maybe in a church look over, and your artillery can safely fire at them. Again, without having to, you know, worried about, you know, not being able to hit as well, so in that regard it's actually quite handy. So I mean, again, while initially unimpressive, it's actually not bad at all. It's actually good, again, perspective considering it costs nothing, it just requires summoning cover or garrisoned. Then we fill up here with the I and R Pathfinders, or Intelligence and Reconnaissance, and you say, oh, they're Pathfinders, but they're not quite Pathfinders like the airborne one. These are more towards scouting, so they don't quite, for example, have the ability to basically snipe their way through a German unit once they pop through a mountain of health. Instead, what they do have is still they have the ability to lay down beacons, but they also have the ability to call in a pretty mean artillery strike. It might not be a huge one, but it's a rapid one, which means properly utilised, you can actually cause your opponent quite a bit of harm there quickly. So I mean, again, they're a bit scout units, but again, they can be used as sort of quickly call in an artillery strike at a nasty position, a garrison machine gun or a Kettenwerfer, a pack position, or whatever you want gone from your sight. So that, for example, there makes them a bit interesting, and it's also interesting because you actually see a variation on a unit which is actually a bit rarer as such. Then we wanted 3 command points. You get access to the M8 Greyhound, basically the cousin of the M20, or as we all of course know it from company of heroes. It can't lay down mines, that's rather than the realm of the M20. It can be upgraded with armoured skirts, no 50 caliber though. What it on the other hand does have, for example, is access to canister rounds. And for those who have played the original and played the British, you ought to know what that means. That means you basically get something that can fire what amounts to a really big shotgun blast. I mean, if you're having an opponent who's rather a bit, you know, silly with his infantry, this is something that can very easily punish him if properly utilised. I mean, that's going to turn a lot of grenadiers or Volksgrenadiers or what have you into very tiny chunks of Heinz. And I'm not talking ketchup here, though it could be mistaken for it to an untrained eye. So sort of light armoured reconnaissance vehicle, and they sort of also deal quite nicely with enemy light vehicles, though it will struggle against a Puma, but on the other hand can do well versus infantry in particular, can exploit some nasty things that versus the infantry if played correctly. Then you get a reconnaissance sweep, pretty much standard stuff. You call in, you get to see what's going on, and then we sort of get to a rather interesting ability. This is something again more reminiscent of the first one. It's basically sort of a mix of units you call in. In this case it's 2 squads of paratroopers and an anti-tank gun, and the paratroopers basically have a mix of weapons. And then you might say, well, what's the point of that? Because it's a bit expensive. I believe it's 900 manpower. And you might say, well, that's a lot. But then again, you consider, oh wait, I get 2 elite squads, paratroopers, they're expensive themselves, plus an anti-tank gun, all in others separately. If you, for example, use the airborne, it would probably cost noticeably more than 900, plus you get the equipment as well, plus it's 7 command points. I mean, properly utilised, it actually allows you to sort of discountedly call in a pretty solid force that can actually lay down a lot of punishment with the opponent, and then say coordinate with the INR Pathfinder to allow the paratroops to reinforce at the front line, and it's not half bad at all. So I mean, it might be sort of a more obtuse ability initially, but again, you know, properly understood, it can be very powerful. And it can certainly give you quite the combat boost in infantry and anti-tank gun assets, and particularly if, say, your paratroopers get some BARs, they're definitely going to give your opponent a bit of a fright. So I mean, that rather sort of typifies the Recon support command. It's very much initially about, reconnaissance, getting an idea of what your opponent doing, but it does possess the ability to quickly deliver some rapid, vicious strikes, but it is a bit lacking sort of heavier punches and sort of heavier durability. The closest you do get is the airdrop combat group, which on the other hand can give you quite a bit of boots on the ground and anti-tank guns, but it's not going to give you any big tanks to roll around and bully your opponent with. Then we move on to Mechanized. Mechanized, yes indeed, it had access to the Dodge truck we've sort of seen before. It's basically like the M3A1 for the Soviets. A bit tough, I think. It's got a 50 caliber, and of course it can have riflemen instead, so it can actually be a bit mean, and currently it's at 0 command points, so compared to the M3A1 you can get it a bit bloody faster. It's a rather mean piece of work at the moment, but overall, I mean, it's basically like the M3A1, so I think further explanation is necessary. And then you get withdraw and refit. Basically allows you to call back a unit, say, you had the Dodge truck up, but things about to get dicey, it's not going to see so much usage, then you use withdraw and refit to basically retreat the unit and get some resources back. Basically meaning, oh, right, this unit isn't doing so well, I can call it back and then shift my strategy. So in this case, it actually gives you some rather serious strategic flexibility in that basically, again, you could sort of shift units around. I mean, you won't get the full amount of resources back, but you get a decent portion out of it. So it won't be heavily punished for sort of shifting around, but it won't be as easy either. But again, it does possess such an ability. So say, for example, you're called in a Jackson, but your opponent, for example, has gone fully in infantry and maybe some Luftwaffe support. Then you could say, oh, well, I'll just call back that Jackson instead, get something to deal with the infantry or the aircraft. So keep that in mind, for example, with withdraw and refit. Then you get an M3 half-track assault group. That's pretty much basically like any other half-track assault group. I mean, it provides the Americans with their only half-track, which can allow them to reinforce, which though makes it a bit more unique, at least with the Americans. It also has assaulting units in it, which can be upgraded to flamethrowers, so it can immediately become a flamethrower half-track in a sense. But of course, I mean, as the Americans, you do possess unique opportunities. You can basically get a lot of bazookas, or say a captain throwing some bazookas, well, and you can actually get a pretty decent sort of bazooka platform to pour a lot of rockets down Fritz's neck. Now again, you can also equip it with BARs, flamethrowers and whatnot, and go after the infantry that way. So I mean, it's a rather interesting thing. I mean, currently not a lot of players use it, but it doesn't mean it's bad, just, not so considered compared to, say, the Dodge, which certainly has a lot more sort of initial improvement and aggressive usage, whereas the half-track assault group is a bit late, and for some players might be, a bit more questionable in usage. But again, it does possess strength, just like the Soviet half-track assault groups or the German half-track assault groups. It does possess its usage, and properly utilizing can do a lot. And again, it does provide you, as the Americans, with another sort of forward point that can be enforcing that isn't an ambulance that goes up as soon as the opponent sneezes at it. Recon sweep, again, pretty self-explanatory. And then we get a heavy artillery barrage, which, well, rather again fits the bill. You call it in, stuff dies. It's a heavier one, of course. It's going to take a bit of a while to sort of call in, but overall, I mean, stuff will not have a happy day. So that's sort of rather it. It's sort of more vehicles, but again, it does give you some strategic flexibility again with the half-track assault groups, but also withdraw and refit. Though a lot of players don't use it a lot, but I think really that's sort of the highlight of this. Though a lot of players tend to focus on the Dodge truck and the artillery, sort of ignoring all the abilities in between, which I think is a bit of a mistake. So that would rather cover it. Then we move on to the Germans, where we sort of basically only have one ability sort of really to point out left, and that is the Scavenge Doctrine. Yes, indeed, Scavenge. Now that's an interesting one. It combines a few things from other commands, well, more specifically only one, and then adds some interesting abilities. For example, you get Thorough Salvage, which means basically you salvage a vehicle, and instead of just getting fuel, you actually get munitions, which is quite handy. 15 munitions, in fact. Overall, not bad. You get access to the Jaeger Light Infantry Squad, a unit which can basically, just like Fulton Jaeger or Partisans, appear out of buildings to be called in from off-map. So, they'll just arrive like regular infantry. A bit expensive, but they also pack quite the punch versus your opponent. They also have the ability to lay down booby traps and sprint, so they can actually serve flexibly offensively, but also help you on the defense. Plus, they can also scavenge, so that's not exactly bad either. In that regard, they're actually quite a popular infantry unit, since they can deliver a lot of damage, and with the veterancy they do become quite a bit tougher. A lot of players don't use the booby traps, but again, I can always recommend booby traps. Booby traps can really mess things up for your opponent if properly utilised. Then you get access to infiltration tactics, basically same stuff as special operations, but not a bad ability. Again, 10 munitions, you can basically lob 5 series of grenades, which properly utilised can actually cause your opponent quite the headache. So overall, very good. I mean, in conjunction with the rest, and also thorough salvage. I mean, it's not bad at all. It's in fact very nice. Then you get the Flak Panzer 4. I mean, for all the Wehrmacht players, I mean, that's pretty much it. The only difference between this and the other one is, well, it gets 2 more levels of veterancy, which isn't bad either. But of course, you can also immediately call into, in some regards, I mean, you know, you can use it a bit more sort of actively or reactively, sort of quickly realising, my opponent has gone for a lot of infantry, I don't suspect any armour. Rapidly calling the Flak Panzer, get some kills in. So in that regard, you know, standard stuff, just you don't have to tech for it. And then you get the 105mm howitzer barrage. And now this is actually a bit more of a unique artillery barrage. It sort of becomes more violent the more munitions you have above the required munitions. So I think it costs like 180 munitions. And then say for example you have 250 munitions, the barrage ability is definitely going to be a lot more vicious. There's going to be a lot more shots called in. It's going to happen a lot faster. And apparently, and this is apparently also supposed to be part of it, you know, later on another barrage can then be called in afterwards. So it's a bit of a unique barrage ability. It's sort of a really violent one, in fact. And sort of one of the benefits by, you know, stocking up the ammunition before calling it in on the right spot and really causing your opponent a headache. I mean, for a commander, it's actually pretty solid. And it certainly is one of the stronger Oberkommandowest doctrines at the moment, and I can certainly recommend that. I mean, it's overall flexible, helps you has something for early game and mid game and late game, so very strong, very solid, and easily recommendable, and also a very popular commander. And for actually got this about the Americans. For Recon support, it's also a pretty good command. Again, it's sort of strong early game, a bit sort of, but at the same time, a lot of things carry over to the mid to late game. But again, it's not going to want to sort of carry a lot of punch. If you want something with punch, I mean, you're not going to want this. I mean, this is not sort of heavy punches. This is more guile, agility, sneaking around, you know, getting in some quick, serious jouts, but then getting up, because again, you're not going to get a lot of durability except you're calling the combat group. And of course, going to be the second kind of durability, just numbers. As for Mechanized, I mean, again, it's all about speed and sort of, you know, realizing, you know, when to sort of quickly shift your strategy away, again, with withdraw and refit. I mean, it's to a certain extent, you know, recommendable. I mean, it has a lot of things that are good, but again, you know, not a lot of players sort of get full ground. And again, you know, it's not going to be one you get for punch to a certain extent. I mean, it has some punch, but it doesn't have, say, rifle companies punch with the EC8, for example, or armor companies with the tank destroyers and the bulldozer Shermans. But it does possess sort of a more mid-level punch and some speed combined with it. And again, the real punch is in withdraw and refit, which quickly allows you to sort of, again, change your strategy on the fly a bit more rapidly and aggressively. But again, I mean, both are recommendable, both are good commanders, though for different reasons. But again, recommendable. Certainly you won't be going completely wrong in town if you get either of these commanders. So I mean, that rather covers it. You know, 3 commanders, all good, but again, you know, the Oberkommandowest, I mean, for the Oberkommandowest here, I mean, it's really the strongest one compared to, say, fortifications or elite armor. I mean, this one is really the best of those 3 at the moment. Because again, it's a lot more varied, and again, it sort of works on several levels, and it basically always has something to some kind of opportunity, a chance, a situation. So I mean, again, very recommendable for any player. And certainly also one I genuinely think won't disappoint anyone. So I think that rather covers it. Thanks for watching. I hope this gave you a clear idea on those commanders. If you're wondering about buying them, you're like, you know, Dane, I'm not entirely sure if you get them. And again, you know, these are my thoughts on it. So I hope that will give you a clear idea on things. And this is Imperial Dane saying thanks for watching. See you all another time.